Welcome everyone. This is Danny and Karl with Get Wisdom, and today we're continuing with the channeling series. And today, Karl is going to channel Jeffrey Epstein, and he's been in the news. He apparently committed suicide while in prison in New York, and kind of his story kind of dominated the news for some time. And you will have seen a little bio about this fellow before we start the interview, so you'll have a little bit of background information. But I think most people probably have heard of this guy and maybe have seen some news reporting. I think 60 Minutes in Australia did a piece on him, and he's been in the news a lot. So interesting fellow. We've had other subjects kind of in the same genre as Jeffrey Epstein, although I think Jeffrey's probably a more modern, more recent example for someone who got involved in allegedly in sex trafficking. So with that, welcome everybody, and thank you, Karl, for doing this with us. And maybe we can have a little discussion before we start the actual channeling.
Okay, well, thank you, Denny, and thanks to those of you watching. We are doing this for you. This isn't for our own enjoyment. It's a labor of love, but for a higher purpose, to bring some light into the world and learn about the different kinds of calamities that can befall one another. When people get off track or there's something suspected like that, there are reasons, and it's instructive to look into it and get a sense of what has happened, because there's always a deeper history. There's a deeper meaning to it. And we've been on this quest for quite a while now, Denny and I and our compatriots, to really learn about the dimensions of evil, because that is the central problem of humanity. Everyone knows we got lots of problems. There's all sorts of things in different ways, different levels, and we're fighting with nature and fighting with one another and various things, the political contests and striving to get ahead and competing and all of that. But we all have sort of a basic right to be here, and that's when things start to clash and sometimes blow up into something unpleasant. And one of the biggest reasons why we don't get along better and why the world isn't running more smoothly is this problem of evil. It's pervasive. It infiltrates every level of society and corrupts almost every human being to one degree or another. And it starts from dark angelic beings who left the heavens long ago, and they became very much working against love and light and trying to hurt one another and hurt human beings and other beings, other physical beings. And they've been cut off from the light now, and they can only exist as parasites. And when they get in us, they're after our energy, first of all. But then they stir us up from within to get more of it. And they are the cause of criminality and all the other kinds of real harsh strife that shows up in relationships, in work settings, within families, with siblings squabbling, and all of the aspects of life where there's trouble.
Health issues.
And health issues as well. And it's insidious because the war within you is going on largely below conscious awareness. There's a deep part of the mind science doesn't know about yet. And that is the playground of these dark spirits. They get in you and they start bullying your deep subconscious. And this gives you anxiety and fear. And they send impulsive thoughts and suggestions, and they taunt and they mock and they harass, and they push people over the edge. So depending on your resilience, your ability to stand up to it or not, things develop from there. Well, one of the other things they do is to try to pervert every human impulse, to darken it in some way, and to cause trouble for their host, because that'll stir up the emotions. They get an energy reward. They love anxious feelings, fearful feelings, angry feelings, because that's the kind of energy that's a good match to them.
And maybe in this case, sexual energy of some
Yes,
sort.
that's right. And,
Yeah.
and we know that's a powerful energetic force. We think of it as an intermittent thing, but it certainly can become a preoccupation or even obsession for some people. And particularly when it's denied or frustrated in some way, then there can be kind of an explosion of desire and energy where people break the law, certainly break acceptable kind of values most people hold in terms of whether someone's being exploited or really involved in a potentially rewarding relationship where there's a give and take and a sharing and not an exploitation.
Right.
But this arena of sexuality is also targeted by the dark forces running the world. In addition to the dark spirits, we've got an extraterrestrial alliance that's working behind the scenes. And they have a lot to do with what governments are allowed and not allowed to carry out. And one of the tools they use to keep people in line is to maneuver them into compromising situations and then use evidence of that as a weapon to potentially blackmail them and destroy their reputation and their livelihood potentially. And it's very, very effective.
And widespread.
And it's widespread because if you look at how many times in recent history that a whiff of scandal has brought down the mighty, or even a quite overt, in your face, incontrovertible act of infidelity or serial acts of infidelity, and then getting involved with a minor, for example, in an intimate relationship. And this type of thing, it's brought down world leaders, or at least diminished them. And it's true across the board with many people in positions of authority. So it's a tried and true strategy, this scandal mongering. And people can be manipulated to take part in such things. They have a sexual aspect to their being, and if they have a dark spirit infestation, that can work on them. So there's a lot of dimensions to this, but the arena, even though it's very unsavory, it's no fun to talk about. This isn't my favorite topic, and I'm in some ways not looking forward to today's discussion because it's very sad and most unfortunate. And it's unfortunate at both ends, the victim
both ends,
and the
right?
perpetrator.
Yeah, exactly. That's just what I was going to say. Is that there's really, the silver lining only comes about as a result of the healing, which is kind of like, that will probably come up in the process of getting these questions answered and stuff. But the topic itself is, largely just bad news.
Yeah, unfortunately. But it's important to understand the dimensions of this, that even the perpetrators, the human beings carrying out acts of predation or manipulation, exploitation, whatever level you want to label it, they were warped and distorted themselves by a manipulation. And that is how people go bad, how they adopt a dark path. So keep that in mind, when you're thinking of someone and you see them as being reprehensible and you're judging them because others have judged them and maybe they're a convicted felon now. They didn't come down into life to do that. This is something that happened to them. So they're in a sense in a very real sense, a victim of this evil influence from multiple directions. So that's my lecture. I don't mean to get off on a big tangent, but I wanted to put it in that framework. This isn't just a kind of a there's titillating topic,
Right. There's a reason that we select someone like him as a channeling subject.
Yeah.
And to be honest and to be fair, he is selected as a channeling subject because he's also newsworthy. and we want
Yes.
people to watch the videos. So we will oftentimes do channelings with people like Jeffrey because they've been in the news, and there is a salacious aspect, but the purpose of the channeling is not for just solely for salacious reasons. We want to get
Yes.
to the heart of this, and the big message here, one of several, is the how important it is to heal the perpetrators. Because in this case,
Absolutely.
allegedly, there was perhaps well over 1,000 or more victims in this scenario. That's what we've learned. And when I researched this, that's what I've learned. So there's a huge payoff if healing can be brought to bear for people like Jeffrey Epstein down the road. That could mean great relief for a lot of people on Earth. Because my contention would be is that this whole sex trafficking thing is enormous, and it's downplayed, and it's treated like some kind of like little marginal aberration in human cultures, many different cultures in the world. But I don't think it's that. I think it's very central to this whole idea of controlling humans on Earth. It's a big part of
Yeah.
how we're kept, with the boot on our neck. This is one of the major methodologies employed.
It's very, very true. And the whole concept of slavery in all its forms comes from the extraterrestrials because that's what they do. They move in on a world like ours and they take it over and they enslave the populace and manipulate them and do it for fun, for sport, for entertainment, as well as some practical things they might be interested in. But beyond that, it's just an exercise in depravity. And I'm fully aware this whole thing sounds nuts.
Yeah.
You know, 10 years ago, I would never have listened to something like this myself because it's just too bizarre and seemingly wildly improbable and could not possibly be true because everyone would know. You know? Well, I'm sorry, but I've lived with things I knew were true all my life that other people don't believe, but I've witnessed personally. And when you have that experience, then you learn about disbelief and doubt that people hold. It's not just they haven't found out yet.
Right.
There is an active component to it to
Yeah.
make people complacent.
You could say it's a perceptual problem.
Yes, it's an inability to wrap their mind around something. And the idea will just bounce off and it won't penetrate.
Yeah.
It'll go in one ear and out the other, proverbial saying, but it's very apt because you can't convince people of this.
Right.
Either they're open to the possibility and they're curious and want to know more and stay with it until they either find a reason to reject it or feel that this is substantive. There's meat here. There's evidence. Or, this is a variable. And today, only a small number of people still have an open mind about things in general across the board.
Yeah.
Most people have been co-opted. So this just adds to the trouble.
Right.
And so if you're curious, you're exploring, you want to learn things, stick with us and see what you can learn from this. And, just keep it in mind and let it be a kind of a variable in your own thinking.
Right.
And, weigh it accordingly.
And one of the important things to point out is that, and I'll speak for you, neither of us would be doing this if we didn't have an answer. So,
Yes.
we're not just muckraking and it's like, this is a terrible world and we're here to prove it. But there's something we can do about this. And that's the main reason that this channeling series exists is that, for all the darkness that we're going to learn about, there's an answer. And so that's part of the whole Get Wisdom mission too, is that we're not just going to leave you with a bag of garbage to deal with. There's something that you can do in response that actually works. It helps the situation that we're going to be describing, and it helps who's ever listening to it.
Absolutely. There is a God. The scriptures were correct. There is a God who cares about us. We were created by that divine being, as well as all the other species. And the rest is history. It's had its good times, and now it's having some bad times. And that's a consequence of free will gone wrong. We've gotten off track, but we've had a lot of help with it. We were manipulated to get off track. And the fascinating thing about it all is we're supposed to be the answer for evil. We were created to come down as kind of warriors for the light and take on this menace of the dark spirits who have crept into our realm, as well as the group of extraterrestrials that are manipulating human society. And they are corrupted by the dark spirits. That's how they got the way they are. It happened to them long before we were even on the scene. So we're kind of newer to the party. We're a young civilization, and we're more in spiritual alignment because this hasn't been so long that we've lost touch totally with the concept of a deity. But everyone who buys into the secular movement and drifts away and gives up on God is making a tragic mistake because it's our lifeline. These are divine level problems. You can't fight something you can't see. Science has no answer for spirit possession and manipulation. They have no answers to deal with the extraterrestrial problem. It's insinuated itself into the warp and woof. They're working with the military in a collaboration, and they're duping the military. So it's too far gone to just sort of call your congressperson and right. Ask them to hold a hearing or whatever you might think of.
Right.
They will not listen to you. So this is something between you and the Almighty. We need everyone to take action and do prayer work. We have a healing protocol that reaches everyone and everything, but we need more people in the activity adding their intention to the whole.
Right.
Just one of us can't pray for the world to be better and make it so. We only have so much spiritual power as an individual. That's to keep everything in balance. You know, you don't want a bunch of would-be dictators running around, any one of whom could, take over the world. So there's a reason that it's this way. But when people come together in common cause and ask for something to be done, the divine will respond. So we're channeling Jeffrey Epstein in the light to hear his story, ask him some interesting questions about his activities and the broader meanings of them and how it fits into this big picture.
Right.
And we're getting help from God to do that. That's how I do my channeling. I reach out to the Almighty and ask Creator to connect me to the subject. That way I can be sure I'm reaching who I intend and not an imposter being. Most channelers are being duped, frankly, and I've probed into this quite a lot and asked Creator about it over and over. And this dilemma, it's really misdirected and misguided so many people who are seeking something spiritual. And they're giving a hand-holding to these channelers and sort of feeding up old ideas, spiritual concepts, and so on that might be valid and sound wonderful, but they won't be probing into serious issues, serious problems, and looking for serious answers.
Right.
Behind more than feel-good solutions.
Yeah.
So I endeavor to connect with accuracy and to have the conversation protected, but it is divinely supported because we're reaching into the heaven here to talk with this being. People are surprised at this. They think people who do wrongdoing go to hell. And that's really not the case. They can suffer, they can get waylaid and become an earthbound spirit and not get back to the light. But everyone else will. good or bad in their life, because the Almighty knows who we are, where we came from. We're a creation of the Almighty being, and everyone has value, everyone has worth. And the Almighty knows everyone's going to find their way back eventually, and they deserve that chance.
Right.
And it's wonderful to know there is forgiveness and there is love behind the universe. And more so than down here amongst the human family. And that's because of this corruption.
Right.
We should all be, uplifted, enthusiastic, eager, naive children, expecting wonders and delighting in every little thing. And this is how we start out. And then life beats us up and we get sour and cynical.
Right.
But there's reasons that happens, and it doesn't have to.
Right.
So there's work to do.
Okay. All right. So I think that's a pretty good introduction for what we're up to here. So with that, maybe we can go ahead and get started.
All right. I will get into the state of consciousness I need to make the connection. And then he will announce his presence, and then it's up to you to carry the ball with your questions.
Okay.
This is Jeffrey Epstein speaking.
Thank you for joining us. Were you able to transition successfully? And were you in fact murdered as opposed to committing suicide as reported? It is known that the cells themselves and everything in the cells make it virtually impossible to hang oneself. How is murder or suicide accomplished given the conditions in your cell?
First of all, I can tell you I did not transition immediately, but needed rescue. And this is a common plight of people who are not in spiritual alignment. Many who take their lives are at the lowest ebb in ability to even think about God or wanting to be with the divine. They are so beaten down emotionally and in such dire straits. Their energy is so diminished, they will not see a divine outreach greeting them, seeking to accompany and raise them up and escort them back where they belong, within the light, the heavenly realm, the higher astral plane, as some describe it. My rescue was a true deliverance from evil and is the first step on my road to recovery from a life of cutting corners, taking chances, and serving myself first and foremost all along the way. It ended up, as all know, with my incarceration and then my death. My death was a suicide, but it was arranged and encouraged to happen. So in that sense, it was a killing. I was a danger to the powers that be because of my guilty knowledge about people in positions of prominence who have engaged in sexual activity with minors and aided and abetted in that by myself. Having a lifestyle seeking such things for my own indulgence, and then using this as a kind of currency to curry favor with the rich and famous, the powerful, to have access to their inner circles, to comport with them, to entertain them and be entertained and to live a lavish lifestyle. This is what led to my downfall, but it was richly deserved. The circumstances of my death are owing to human ingenuity. When one desires to end their life, there are myriad ways to bring that about. One can simply weaken one's self to the point when a natural stressor will do the deed. In my case, there were ample materials at hand. And the reason this was so is that your description of having an impossible absence of such means is inaccurate. In actuality, in defiance of prison policy and regulations, conditions were arranged to facilitate this event to happen. I was alone in my cell when I was supposed to have a cellmate. In most cases, cellmates will intervene if someone is trying to kill themselves, or at least will summon a guard because of a sense of inner duty as a human being to not see someone suffer unduly. That is a major deterrent and a step that was denied and lowered my protection accordingly. In contrast to the demeanor I adopted in dealing with those on the outside, I was in a state of deep despair, having been pushed from my lofty perch and cast down as one of the most repugnant and reviled class of human males, that of a pedophile. And my life, I knew, was destroyed, that I would never regain anything close to what I had, and in fact would almost certainly never leave prison. In my estimation, that left me with nothing, and life was not worth living. To escape a life of pain was the better course in my thinking. There were materials at hand with which I could hang myself, and the ability to launch myself from the upper tier of a bunk bed was a factor in attaining the force needed to do the deed. And that explains the bone fractures that seem so mysterious. Most people will find a gentler approach where they find a way to have a noose that is tightened enough to begin restricting blood flow as much as airflow. And it is the combination of the two that eventually causes a fatal anoxia, a lack of oxygen in the body. I was desperate to succeed because I had tried previously and failed in the attempt. So I spent much of my time strategizing and thinking about how I could guarantee success in doing this. The major reason for the preoccupation was mind control manipulation being done to me. I was manipulated externally and internally, both. I did have dark spirit possession ongoing, and that was a factor in my lifestyle. I was also manipulated by extraterrestrial psychic messages encouraging taking the easy way out, creating a siren song of escape. And it grew to be larger and larger as a valid answer for my predicament. In the same fashion, the guards in the facility holding me were manipulated to be inattentive and to fall asleep during the time I acted. In addition, the cameras in that tier of cells were inactivated. This too was done by extraterrestrial means. This is trivial, as they do this routinely. That is the reason that extraterrestrial abductions are rampant, but no trace is left on security cameras. They are always turned off or blocked in some way. So there is a pause in function until they have left the scene. My death was orchestrated to happen, but it was, in the end, the actions of myself alone to carry out, and not a murderer in the form of a person or persons. There is security evidence from the facility showing that no outsiders were penetrating the building and therefore able to reach my cell. And the guards who had access to me were accounted for elsewhere. So this left a most mysterious gap with many odd occurrences happening simultaneously. This deserves a nice conspiracy to blossom, because there were too many coincidences with my being such a high value, high profile criminal to be treated cavalierly and take this risk, particularly with the recent prior history of attempting to take my own life. I lied to the authorities that this was an attack from another inmate, but they did put me on suicide watch as a consequence. Normally, that would have led to much stricter supervision of the contents of the cell, the issue of being alone and then being unsupervised for a whole night. And with the security cameras turned off, even remote supervision was impossible. There was not a camera in my cell, but there would have been regular checks on me under normal prison function, and this would have been much harder to carry out in most cases, the suicide from such amateur efforts takes a while for the body to wind down and give up. If people are found relatively quickly after their act to bring about their death, they can be revived. All depends on oversight, scrutiny, and vigilance to take seriously the obligation and responsibility in supervising the life of another under your care. Granted, a prison setting is not a daycare center or hospital, but humans are human, and all deserve humane treatment. When the state takes someone and incarcerates them, there needs to be at least humane treatment, given that the people involved are soul-based beings and have a value beyond their knowing and their estimation. As you rightly pointed out in your preliminary discussion, no one deserves to be degraded and to be distorted in their thinking and the way they live, to live a life of evil. This is done to people, and it is done bit by bit. They have a responsibility themselves and will inherit a karmic consequence. This is true for me as well. I have not escaped. I have only arranged an interval of time to be out of action, so to speak. If and when I return to life in a new incarnation, I will have all of what I have done to answer for still. That has not been washed away or forgiven by the law of karma. This is what people need to understand about evil. Even when you become corrupted, if it is happening on your watch, you do bear responsibility. It is a mitigating factor that it was done to you. But your weakness in those moments is part of your obligation to readjust, to rebalance, and put back into the universe the energy that was taken away through your negligence and neglect. This is a serious matter, but it is the ordinary course of life and the way of things, and has been since the creation of the universe. We are here to learn lessons, and even from acts of evil, we learn. And these are the greatest lessons of all. It is the reason you are in life right now listening to these words. You came to learn, and you came to heal your brethren. That was your life purpose, each and every one of you, starting with yourselves. Most people are still working on themselves and see no way to help others. That is a deficiency in knowledge and awareness. But we know that you and your channel are doing all you can to awaken your fellow humans to the possibilities of achieving a collaboration with the divine, to call forth divine grace for many of the past woundings that drag everyone down individually and collectively.
Okay, thank you. Did the members of the royal families or non-royal high-level figures have more to lose from your continued presence? Was there a threat to them that you would testify against them?